on the new Yankee workshop.
The new Yankee workshop features the craftsmanship of Norm Abram.
One of the best places in London to find English country pine antiques is here at the Pine Mine. And once again, I turn to Jake Foreman for a little bit of help. Well, Jake, today what I'm looking for is a small corner cover, the type that you might hang in a corner.
Yes, corner covers. Well, as it happens, we have a very pretty one here, which is bow-fronted, fairly unusual.
That is very unusual.
And a nice early piece. It's mid-18th century. Has some nice original hinges here.
You know, at first glance, this board, I thought it was going to be one piece, but right away I see a seam here, one over here. You suppose they joined several boards together?
I think so. I think that's exactly how they do them.
And then maybe plane them until they were just the right shape?
Absolutely.
Very nice.
It's nice bow-fronted shelves here.
Well, you know, I didn't quite expect to find a piece like this here. I was thinking more of the more traditional flat front.
Yes, well, we, as it happens, have one of those, which is earlier than this, in fact.
Oh.
It's downstairs.
Lead on. Jake, what are the condition of the pieces when you first obtained them?
Well, most of them are painted. We strip them and then we wax them. One thing we don't do, or never do, is stain them, because that brings out the wrong sort of colours. So we just apply nice waxes, and there's a good piece here which you'll see the sort of results you can get.
Oh yeah, the wax
Lovely,
really makes the wood look beautiful.
Yes, beautiful finish on that. It's very old cupboard.
Yeah, this is a nice cupboard. Good size across the front with the big raised panel.
Yes.
The back of it's a little crude though, boards, but of course I guess you don't see that.
Good rustic piece.
What do you like about it?
I like the hinges here indicate a date to about Queen Anne, which is early 18th century. And this little catch here is probably the same date. That's probably a little bit later.
Yeah,
that is sculptural.
You know, I'm noticing up here at this top corner that this piece is square. I would expect it to be mitered or even these two moldings brought together.
Yes, the reason for that is it was made probably for someone's house. So they cut the ends here so that it fitted particularly in the corner.
It's a custom piece.
It's a custom piece, yes.
Oh yeah, I can see that on the inside.
Yes.
This is short and this is long.
Yes, another indication really that it was made for a certain place in the house.
A couple shelves with a bit of reinforcement.
Good shelves, reinforcement, probably for heavy bits there.
Oh, look at this. This is not old. More of a modern patch.
Not too modern that, but it is a later repair, yes.
You know, these wormholes, I'm seeing them all over the place. Everything I look at has them.
Yes, that's no longer alive. We find with most 18th century pieces as well. But we treat it. And here's a nice feature, a nice old lock, which is all part of the cupboard.
Well, it's a great piece. Would you mind leaving me alone while I get to know more about it?
Help us out, Phil.
Thank you. Well, you know, I did study that flat front corner cupboard. But the more I thought about it, I just had to build the bow front one. And here it is, the first prototype. Now, I built the cabinet front that you'll see when it's installed out of what's known as sinkers, logs that went to the bottom of rivers as they were moved to the sawmills. And 100 years later, they're carefully being removed, sawed, kiln dried, and sold to cabinet makers. Now, this happens to be hard pine. It's a beautiful wood, but it does contain quite a bit of pitch, so it gums up the sanding belts and the tools. But if you can find any, it's really worth the effort. Now, on the inside, there's a couple differences. I did use the hard pine for this lower interior shelf and this upper piece, but the intermediate shelves are white pine. And the carcass of the cabinet is built from half-inch cabinet-grade plywood, because I know that's not going to come and go, and it adds a lot of stability to the project. So if you'd like to build one of these for your home, we will have a measured drawing and a materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. I also want to take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now, last night, before I left the shop, I did glue up a couple panels. This one in the hard pine, those interior top and bottom pieces, and this one in the white pine for the intermediate shelves. But I didn't glue up a panel for the upper and lower decorative pieces because I wanted to review panel glue-ups. And the first thing I want to do is cut 4 pieces 45 inches long. Well, as good as this material is direct from the mill, there's always a little bit of variation in the thickness. And since this pine is so difficult to sand, I'm going to take the trouble to run it through my surface planer. Now here I'm marking the boards to keep them in the right sequence as we move through the steps. And if you look at the end of the boards, you'll see that I've alternated them so that the growth rings are up, and down. That way, I'll get more stability in the overall glue-up. Now, the next thing I want to do is sweeten the joints between the boards. I don't want to use just clamp pressure to pull these together. This is where the joiner comes in handy to take care of all those edges. Now here, I'm laying out the pieces that will be cut from the blank. First with a big framing square. Then, using my tape measure, I'm going to swing the approximate radius of the piece. And if you think that's premature, it's really not, because the next step is to locate these biscuits, which are going to reinforce the joints. Just putting a line across each joint. And what I'm trying to avoid is putting biscuits out where I don't need them, but more importantly, getting a biscuit that might be on an exposed edge. Now here, I'm using my stationary biscuit joiner to cut the boat-shaped slot for the biscuit. Well, now it's just a matter of getting glue on the edge of the board, in the slots, and on the biscuits. Now just enough clamp pressure to squeeze the joint tight without squeezing all the glue out. Now here, I'm cutting out the triangular shapes from the blank. And I found that the best choice to do that is with the circular saw. Now you might have noticed I left a little bit of the line. I'll clean up any variation at the joint. To cut the curved front on the various shelves, I need 2 jigs. This one, which is my circle cutting jig, and that's attached to my bandsaw, and it acts as an extension of the table. And you can see how many times I've used it with various radii. Today, I want to use this hole right here, which is 16 inches from the center of the pin to the face of the blade. Now, the other jig is this one, which is just a piece of 1/4-inch plywood with a hole on one end that will slip over the pin, and 2 cleats that are 90 degrees to one another and align with the center of the pin. Simply take the blank piece of material, fit it tightly against the cleats, hold this corner down with my hand, and use this hand to guide it through the slot. For these intermediate shelves, which are slightly larger, I'm just going to move my pin to the 16 1/8 inch radius mark. Now, my drum sander does a nice job smoothing up the sawn edges. Using just a portion of a 1/4-inch radius round over bit, I'm easing the front corners of all the intermediate shelves. I need to get a sheet of plywood to start building the carcass. This is the material I want to use. It's known as Baltic birch. It's symmetric in size. It's a little thinner than a 1/2 inch, and it comes in 60-inch by 60-inch sheets. And I'm told by my supplier that it comes from someplace in the former Soviet Union. The reason I like to use it for cabinets is because it has multiple laminations and it contains no voids. What I'm going to do is cut 2 pieces out of the sheet for the back corners of our cupboard. Well, now we'll exchange the saw blade for the stacked dado head cutter. Now that takes care of the dados for the 3 intermediate shelves. Now I'm going to add an auxiliary fence and do a rabbet for the top and bottom shelves. Now here I'm just using a scrap piece of plywood to set the fence on the dado head. And that's so that I can run a rabbet down the back edge of the wider of the 2 back pieces. Now you can see how much more surface area I have for glue on a joint like this. With a little glue on the other edge, I just slip the two pieces together and fasten it with some 1-inch brads. Now for the top and bottom shelf, I'm only going to put glue about halfway down each joint. I expect that this pine is going to shrink a little bit. The plywood's certainly not going to move, so I have to allow for a little bit of movement. Now, the antique in London and our prototype has a beaded detail right along the edge of the stiles. So to make that, I've set up my router table with a beading bit. And with the blanks already cut to the right width, I'll just run the edges through. The next thing I want to do is make a rabbet in the back edge of the stile to fit over the carcass. But I can't make just a simple 90-degree rabbet to the back of the piece, because you can see it won't be parallel to the curved front. It needs to be tipped just a little bit. And I've calculated that angle to be about 5 degrees. Over here at the saw, I've tilted my blade 5 degrees and adjusted my rib fence to make the first pass, which is along the back of the stile. Well, now if we take the stile and slip it over the side of the carcass, you see that it doesn't fit that round quite yet. So what I want to do is first mark the thickness of the bottom and top shelf. And then I want to raise it up so that the rabbet seats tight, and this corner is right even. And then trace the curve of the front onto the end grain. So now I have a couple marks that I can use a sharp knife and a chisel to clean out this area on both stiles, top and bottom. So if I ever want those doors to work properly later, I have to bevel the beaded edge of each stile at 5 degrees. Now with both stiles clamped into their final position, I want to put a mark where the stile meets the carcass at each shelf location. From a scrap of wood, I've made a little marking block. This inside angle is about 85 degrees so that it fits tightly against the carcass and the back of the stile. I've also cut the length so that it's perfectly flush with this edge. Now I can remove the stiles and slip in the intermediate shelves. Now here's where that marking block comes in. Slide it right up against the pencil mark I made on the carcass. Draw a line across the front and a little line at the edge. And just using my combination square, I can sight down that side line and put a mark right here. And I'll remove that material with a hand saw. Well, now using some glue and nails, we can install these shelves. Now, just as I did with the top and bottom shelf, I'm only putting glue about halfway down the side of each rabbet. Okay, now a little glue on every shelf notch and some in the rabbet of the stile. I now can attach everything with some 1-inch brads. All right, well that takes care of that. Now tomorrow we'll get to making those curved doors. Well, before I quit last night, I took the time to cut the pie-shaped pieces out of the panel that I glued up. And I've just run this cove detail on the lower panel. Now I want to switch to a Roman ogee profile bit to do the top panel. Okay, that looks good. Now we'll put these aside and start working on the doors. Now in order to make the doors, I did make a full-scale pattern in order to calculate the angles. It shows the curve of the shelf and the outline of each style. If you look at the pattern, you'll see that this is one door and this is another door. Each door is made up of 4 segments. 1, 2, 3, 4. And they're joined not at 90 degrees, but at a little bit of an angle, so they start to form a curve. You can see that later I'm going to have to remove material at these high spots. Now over here are a couple boards that will form one door, planed to 11/16 of an inch thick and jointed so that they're nice and straight. Now the first thing to do to start forming the curve is to bevel the edges of these 2 boards so they start to take this shape. Okay, now that is step 1. The next step is to segment each of these boards using the same angle. Okay, that's going to be good. When I built the prototype, I found that forming the inside of the doors took a lot of time and effort, mainly because this wood is so hard and it contains so much pitch. So this time I've decided to set up my twin blade wobble dado head cutter and use it set at a slight bevel to remove some of the material to help the process later. The biscuits will add strength and will help in the clamping operation. On one edge of each door, I'm adding a narrow strip to allow me to make that beaded overlap. Okay, now this little thin scrap is just to keep the edge from getting damaged, and these C-clamps will just keep the whole thing from popping out on that end. Well, you know, they say you can never have enough clamps in a workshop. I'd have to agree with that. To secure the top and bottom pieces, I'm just using some screws. I've made some plugs from a scrap of my hard pine, and now I'm just going to plug the counterboard. Well, the doors sat in the clamps for about 2.5 hours, and I've just beveled the hinge side of the door using my joiner with the fence set at a 5-degree bevel. Now I'm ready to rip the doors to the correct width. And I want a 5-degree bevel on the ripped edge. But because the bow of the door is up, I've had to tilt the saw to about 15 degrees. Now, using my panel cutting jig, I'm squaring one end of the door, and then I'll cut it to length. Now, that was the first cut of 2 that I'm going to need to make a rabbet where the doors meet in the center. Now, the first cut on this door was with the blade tilted at about 17 degrees. Now, with the blade back to 5 degrees, I can complete the rabbet on the right-hand door. But once again, using my router table with my beading bit, I put the decorative bead on the overlapping door. Well, now, using my low-angle block plane, I'm knocking off the high points. Okay, now with my nice brass H hinges installed and the doors fitted, I think we're all set. We won't put the bolts on the inside of the fixed door and the latch on this operating door until after we figure out what we're going to do for a finish. I definitely don't want to conceal the look of this hard pine, yet I want to protect the piece. So I think the best choice is Danish oil. Clear Danish oil, 2 or 3 coats, which will give me the protection I need, yet it will allow this hard pine to age to that honey orange that it does. Now, on the inside of my corner cupboard, I'm treating the plywood and the shelves with a coat of acrylic latex primer. And I think that's about all I'm going to do to it. Well, here it is, with the interior all painted, the outside oiled, and the nice brass hardware. Is it any surprise that it's become the favorite around here?